Three of you for some great testimony today, and most importantly for what you and the men and women who are in your organizations do every day to help keep us safe. I noticed in your opening statement, Director Ray, you talked about the 1,000 Talents program, and as you may know, the Permanent Subcommittee Investigations with Senator Carper and others, we're in the process of looking into that issue and have done a series of hearings on related items, including on the Confucius Institutes. In fact, we did a Confucius Institute report that indicates that there are limitations that China places on the activities here, including censorship. As an example, not allowing the academic community here to discuss topics they believe are politically sensitive, such as, the Tiananmen Square uprising or something like that. But as you say, it goes well beyond Confucius Institutes. You said that China is abusing the 1,000 Talents program. I wrote, you also said that the FBI has about 1,000 cases, coincidentally, investigating technology transfer. And you said that universities should be smarter about defending themselves. I guess my question would be, what efforts have the FBI taken to inform the higher education community about this threat, and what has your response been?
So I think you've put your finger on an important issue. The role of academia in our country, especially given the amount of taxpayer-funded research there is in particular, is a key component to this counterintelligence threat. So in addition to investigations, and I can't give you the number out of the 1,000 that involve universities and in particular graduate students and researchers, but certainly it's a significant number. But in addition to the investigations, we're much more actively engaged with major universities in encouraging them and informing them so that they can take appropriate action voluntarily, but robustly to guard against the threat. As far as the reaction we've gotten, it varies, but I've been actually quite encouraged by quite a number of universities which a few years ago would not have wanted to meet with the FBI under any circumstances, much less in the kind of partnership way that's occurring now, including very good responsiveness from Ohio State. I've met with them, and we had an academic summit in FBI headquarters just about a month ago where we brought in chancellors and others from universities all across the country, a whole bunch of our SACs, and kind of briefed them on some of the threats and had engagement about how we can work more constructively together to help them defend themselves.
Well, our information is that Ohio State certainly and some other schools have expressed their interest in working even more with you and appreciate what has been done. They also, I think, are not providing us the transparency we need to know whether there's a problem. Would you agree with that?
Well, I probably let Ohio State speak for itself in terms of its own transparency. But
I'm talking about Ohio State. I'm talking about just in general. We found out, as you may know, in our investigation, as an example, that about 70% of the schools were not properly reporting the foreign government payments that they were receiving with regard to the Confucius Institutes. So the transparency, although it's some of it's in law already and not being followed, is not adequate in our view. Is that your view?
I think it's fair to say there's a lot of room for improvement, but we're seeing improvement.
Okay. We talk about another issue that is a national security threat for our entire country, but for Ohio, particularly hard hit, and that's the drug crisis and the epidemic of overdoses and deaths. We know that the southern border has lots of challenges. One is certainly the drug issue. We know that crystal meth, which is the new drug that is causing havoc in our communities in Ohio, but also heroin and cocaine, comes almost exclusively across that southern border. And my question to you is really about what's happening. You see a significant reduction in terms of crossings. I'm looking at some data here that compares last month to the month of May as an example. Almost a 1/3 reduction in crossings, or at least in apprehensions, which would indicate crossings. So the number of people coming over has slowed considerably, still a significant issue, but not like it was. And yet, from all indications we have, the drug flow has not been reduced, even though many have linked some of the same traffickers who bring people across as bringing drugs across. Can you speak to that and talk about how these drugs are coming over? And Assistant Secretary Glau, if you'd like to speak to that, that'd be helpful to this issue. But what more can we do, of course, on the border, but also what is the relationship between people crossing and drugs crossing?
Senator, thank you for the question. Just to give you the numbers from 2017 to 2019, so you know what we're dealing with on the narcotic flows. We've seen a 40% increase in cocaine from seizures at the southwest border. We've seen a 20% increase in fentanyl. We've seen a 30% increase in heroin. And to your point, we've seen a 200% increase in methamphetamine. And that's in addition to the emergency on the border we've had with the migrant flows and Border Patrol and Office of Air and Marine and our Office of Field Operations being taken offline for just detention. So we have a crisis at the southwest border, and it's all based on moving people and goods illicitly across the border. And that's what it's about. Cartels are about moving goods and people across the southwest border.
So with almost a third fewer people, have you seen any reduction in the drug flow? Because we certainly haven't experienced that
No,
on the other end.
we've seen it increased. We've seen an increase, and that's what we're apprehending. So those numbers are probably low. That's what we're catching. It's what else is going in. So we've seen those increases in the last 2 years. And the cartels are a sophisticated business about moving supplies in the United States. They're as good as any major business. Their profits, and it ranges largely, but they're a Fortune 500 company. And it's all about moving illicit goods across the border. And it's a sophisticated network of, and I'm sure you've heard the names of plaza bosses, which run and control what moves across the southwest border. And their trafficking supply chains and their relationships with China, which is now, so the fentanyl production is moving into Mexico, is very sophisticated, very robust, and constantly changing and dynamic.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up with you on that and maybe a QFR here on the fentanyl issue. My sense is there's not a lot of production of fentanyl in Mexico, but there is processing.
Senator,
in other words, they're getting it just as we were getting it through the mail system, and still do, by the way, but they're getting it to Mexico, often converting it into a pill form and then sending it over. And again, a huge increase compared to even a few years ago, so a new threat on the border. But look, I think the demand side is key here. We've done a lot of work on that. We'll continue to on prevention, recovery programs, treatment. But we've got to do something to deal with the flow, too, because this crystal meth, I will tell you, in the streets of Columbus, Ohio, I'm told is less expensive than marijuana and deadly. And so we would appreciate any input you have as to how we can do a better job to reduce that supply at a minimum, not just reducing the poison coming into our communities, but reducing the impact because it'll increase the cost.
Senator, I would just follow up as far as actioning this. It's a sophisticated approach that goes just beyond law enforcement. It's partnership with our U.S. intelligence community partners, our Mexican intelligence community partners, the Mexican military, as well as our military. And that partnership is robust, and we have a very good relationship with our Mexico partners. But it's really upping the game and a strategy to impact these groups that's going to have to go city by city, state by state. And as I mentioned to Chairman Johnson earlier, there are some areas that are primarily controlled by the cartels in that supply chain, and it's very sophisticated and will require a real strategic approach to how we're doing business.